Alright, so let me give you a brief introduction to a scientific calculator over here. Now you'll notice that if I was to look at just this portion right here, that's very similar to what we call just a traditional basic calculator. And so most of you are probably familiar with that. You can do things like 6 times 9 is 54. You can clear that out. You can do like 5 minus 6. And you'll notice that this is very similar to working through this. So now let's talk a little bit about this rest over here. And that's what we call scientific calculating. There's a lot of different things that these buttons can do. Now for the time being, you don't need to worry about sine, cosine, tangent. So these buttons right here, that's for trigonometry, which is much later down the road. Radicals also deals with trigonometry, so you really don't need to worry about that for this portion. Okay, Rand, also the same thing. We can choose a random number. That might be helpful, but you'll notice that some calculators will have some of these features, some will have different ones. Some buttons will look different. For example, let me show you this one, the x to the y. What that is saying is that is raising it to the power. Sometimes you'll see the button like this. Sometimes you'll see it as y raised to x. Sometimes it'll be very different styles of how that button will be shown. Okay. Now notice that x squared here is saying whatever value, if you want 3 squared, you'll just go 3 and then press that button. And so it's 3 times 3 or 9. So I'm saying 3 squared by pressing those values. So one thing that you need to look at is, as you're working with a calculator, is finding what each of these values kind of do and work with. Now for example, the logarithms and ln is ex 10 to the x, you don't need to worry about those either. Okay, so only try and figure out, ignore the buttons you're not familiar with and just focus on the ones that you need to work on. Okay, so really for this class, at this point, the x to the y button is your big one. That's the one we're kind of learning right now. Now if it's you're squaring something or raising it to the power of 3, one of those could work. Okay, so you'll notice that if I press even the second, it'll give me more options of other stuff. Okay, you'll even, like I said, see y to the x, 2 to the x. There's a lot of different features with this. So like I said, this is the one we're looking for. Your calculator might have it look like that. It's just what we call the caret button. And you can actually type that on your computer to get the same value. Okay, so let's give me a few problems that I can work with, and we can look at this. Now the first one I want to do is a negative 5 minus 53. Now when you look at this problem, okay, on a calculator you can go negative 5. Now the thing is you don't go negative, okay, so let me clear that out. Don't go negative 5 because notice it doesn't keep the negative. So you just have to get used to going 5 and then making it negative. So the plus minus just takes the opposite. So if I'm at a positive 5, it'll now make that negative 5. So in this case, I'm going to have to type the 5 first and then make it negative. Now I'm going to subtract a positive 53. So I'm going to subtract a positive 53, and negative 58 is the correct answer. Now notice I could have done this a different way. Negative 5 plus a negative 53. Now let's look at how that one looks. So I go 5 negative plus 53, make it negative, push equals, and I get the same exact answer, which is a negative 58. So notice how that trick works with a calculator. You have to physically realize that if I'm going to put in a negative number, I first have to put in the positive, so 5, and then push the opposite sign. Then I push the plus sign. Now remember, this is not a minus sign, it's a negative sign, so I put 53, make it negative, equals. And that's how I get my answer. So that's just a quick little idea on something that isn't quite familiar with most people, is to pin the positive number first and then make it negative. The next thing I want to talk about that is going to be kind of used throughout is fractions. Now you'll notice, if I was to give you a problem like this, negative 2/5 times 15 over 14, okay? I can't really just type in here 2/5. This isn't a fraction. Now some of them do have those features, some calculators, some don't. In this case, what I'm going to do with this multiplication problem is I'm actually going to simplify this, and so that's one of the strategies that we learned. Okay, I can take 5 into 15. This is 15 is actually could be rewritten as 3 times 5. And then this 5 divided by 5 is actually 1. So I can actually cancel those out because I'm just multiplying this number by 1. And same thing, 2 can go into 14 7 times. So I'm left with negative 3/7. Now if I want to use a calculator for this, let's actually do that. 3 divided by 7 is actually this number, and I can make it negative. Okay, so that's negative 3/7. Now, one thing to realize is that this is a continuing decimal, so you can't quite always go that route. But one thing I want to look at is this value over here, negative 2/5. So I'm going to do 2/5, which is 2 divided by 5. Now make this number negative. Okay. Now I'm going to multiply this by 15/14. So I multiply this by 15 over 14. And you'll notice I get the exact same answer as negative 3/7. So that's one way you could do this, but I can't convert this back into a fraction. And so that's why it gets tricky sometimes. Some calculators will allow you to do that. Usually that button will be viewed as something like this. Okay, something like that will be, that's a mixed number, and you can work with that. Another times you'll see some buttons that actually have this. What that means is a fraction converted to a decimal. So if I had this button, I could actually turn a fraction into a decimal or a decimal into fraction. I can go back and forth on both ways. Okay? And so one thing that I want to do now is I'm going to show you one other button that's going to be kind of important for this area. Let's do 1.07 raised to the power of 27. So I come over to my calculator, and you're going to usually start with the base, which in this case is 1.07. Now you're going to raise it to the power of 27. Now I'm going to come over here, and this x to the y button is the next value. When I press this, okay, so notice how I'm doing this, 1.07, then I press the button, x to the y, or if you have another button that just has a caret, you can press that. Once I press that button, I now press 27, and then I press equal sign. What I've just done is I've taken 1.07 and raised it to the power of 27 to get me the value of 6.21, and I'm going to round it at that point and just keep it there. But you'll get how that works as you go through the different processes. Okay? So that kind of gives you a little bit of idea how to do some of those basic calculations, and especially use the exponent value. Now, hopefully you're comfortable with the multiplication, hopefully you're comfortable with other values, but if you do have more questions about how to use a calculator, please don't hesitate to put any questions here on the discussion board, and I'll answer them for you. All right, good luck.